The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to our webinar, Form I-9 Compliance for California Employers. Boy, we got that revised form this last month, so we are ready to talk today with some experts. My name is Julie Dorr, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Our presentation will last approximately 40 minutes, with the remaining time available for your questions. If during the presentation you have any questions, feel free to type them in the designated area of your dashboard, and I will be happy to assist you. Also, don't forget that you can also email me, and my email address is julie@thedoorgroup. There we go. It's up on the screen now, and I do believe Linda has control, so we'll be able to move right along here. Again, it's julie@thedoorgroup, so feel free to email me with any questions that you may have. And then as you're looking at the dashboard to see where you have questions, you can also download the handout. We have today's presentation put together in a nice handout form where you can do notes. So go ahead and download that, and if you have any problems, again, email me and I'll be happy to assist you. Before we get started, please note that this webinar and all of the accompanying materials are protected by copyright and that the entire conference is being recorded. This presentation provides general information only and does not constitute legal advice. We recommend that you consult with your own legal counsel to address your specific situation. So let's get started today by welcoming our expert panelists. First, we have attorney Marla Merhab Robinson. Marla's with the law firm MRJC, where she's a partner and head of the firm's transactional department. She primarily practices in the areas of corporate, mergers and acquisitions, real estate, finance, and employment law. And then, of course, we have our people problem solver, Linda Duffy, president of Ethos Human Capital Solutions. Linda works with business owners and executives to provide strategic human resources direction, develop leadership talent, and of course increase the overall organizational effectiveness. And then last but not least, we have recruited our expert panelists who joining us today with over 29 years experience representing U.S. businesses and immigration services. Attorney Monica Lukoschek practices in all aspects of employment-based immigration and non-immigration issues. And so today we're going to start off, Linda's going to walk us through kind of the overview, and then we'll launch into actually how to get that I-9 form, revised form working in your organization. Linda?
Great, Julie. Thanks so much, and welcome everybody. Glad that you were able to join us today. We are going to walk you through the new Form I-9. This turned out to be great timing, as Julie mentioned, because we had actually been planning on doing a webinar on I-9 forms, mostly because we do a lot of audits when we go out to audit the HR department, and we always include a review of the I-9 forms. And in the 9 years I've had this business now, I cannot believe, but never once have we found 100% compliance, never once. There's always problems. So we're going to, as we go through here, talk about the different types of problems that we often see, but also talk to you about the new form and what you need to know, because there are some changes from the form that expired. Well, technically expired in March, but we've been continuing to use it until now. So there's 2 new versions of the form. We're going to walk you through how to complete it, talk about those acceptable documents, some tips for what to do and not to do, also how to make corrections, because the good news is if you do find there is a problem, you do have permission to correct it. There's just a right way to do that, so we'll talk about that. Talk about some document retention, and then Monica is going to talk about some of the problems she sees and the penalties for that, because they're pretty significant, and so I know she's got some of her own horror stories to share with you. Marla's going to jump in on that as well, and then E-Verify, talk a little bit about that. It's not a requirement in California, but Monica will talk to you about some of the pros and cons, and then of course we always save room for questions at the end. So let's start by talking about how to complete the new I-9 form. So I took a lot of screenshots for you today. If you haven't, I'll give you a link in a second where you can go download the form so you can play along during the webinar if you want. The new version, and the way to make sure that you're using the most current form, is you always look at the expiration date in the top right-hand corner of page 1. So you see where I highlighted it there. It says it expires August 31st of 2019. A lot of times when we go into do an audit, we'll find that that employers are using the wrong version of the form even. I did an audit not too long ago. They were using the form that expired, I don't remember when, like 2013, I think. The form that we've been using and you can still use until January has an expiration date of March of this year on it. So you want to make sure that you always are using the most current form, and that's how you're going to tell what it is. So this version can be used starting right now if you want to, but it must be used starting January 22nd of next year. Okay, so you have a little bit of time to download and get used to it, but you can start using it right now if you want, so I say go ahead and do it. Also note that there is a Spanish version of this form, but it may only be used in Puerto Rico. If you have somebody that's a primary Spanish speaker and they cannot complete the English version, then there is a way to help them with that, and we'll walk you through that translation or preparation part. Also note that another mistake I've seen some employers make is when a new version of this form comes out, it does not mean, in fact, you're prohibited from going back to your existing employees and having them fill out a new form. There's no requirement to do that, and in fact, you're prohibited from doing that. So this is just a new form that you'll use as you hire people going forward. As I mentioned, there's two versions of the form. One is a paper version. This is how they're referring to it, paper and electronic. The thing to know, though, is both versions must be printed out and have a wet signature, okay? There are no digital signatures allowed. So there's a link if you want to go to the uscis.gov website. You can do the /I9. You also, when you get a chance, find their page that's called I-9 Central. I find it really helpful to bookmark that page because it has just a ton of information on it. So go there, and that'll give you some help and have some other, answers to questions, FAQs, things like that. Now, the electronic version has a couple of changes on it, or compared to the old form, and so I wanted to just point those out. If you notice on where it says List A, this is obviously from page 2 where the employers fill it out, you'll notice the question marks and circles. The great news about the electronic form is that it has instructions actually built into the form. So you can still go get 15 pages of instructions, if you want to download them, and I'll show you in a little bit the link to do that. But what's great is as you're filling out the document and as the employee is filling out their portion, if they're using it online, you can just click on that little question mark and it'll tell you exactly what it is that you're looking for. So I think that those of us that do a lot of I-9 forms, we probably don't need those, but I think for employees that's going to be a really big help to them. Another advantage of the electronic form is that it shows you if you missed something. So it actually highlights fields. So when you fill out page 1, for example, at the bottom there's a place where you can actually check. You can finish page 1 and it'll check and it'll highlight something here if you've missed it. Ladies, I don't know if somebody does not have their phone muted, but I'm picking up a lot of background noise, so please check your phones. So it actually shows if you're missing something, and it highlights it with this pinkish red color. So that's really helpful if you just want to do a quick check. That way, again, it's sort of dummy-proofing the forms for us. One thing to note about I-9 forms is that, like in this section with the employees, you must insert N/A or not applicable into any space if the employee chooses not to answer a question or it doesn't apply. So I'm going to walk through using the paper version just because it's a little bit less cluttered, but we can certainly answer any questions about either form if you want to. So this employee section 1, this is page 1 of the form, and it's the employees section to fill out. I've typed in some information here just so you can take a look at it. As I mentioned before, in that top right-hand corner where it has an N/A for not applicable, if, like for example, John's never used any other last names, then he needs to fill that in with NA. He fills out the rest of the form. The 3 sections that I have circled in red are optional sections. You cannot require John to put in an email address, a telephone number, or, believe it or not, even a social security number. There's no place for you in that field to put NA, so I think that's why on the prior slide it wasn't highlighted. But you are not allowed to require them. You certainly can ask them to include it, but if they don't want to give you that information on the I-9 form, they're not required to do so. The next thing that John's going to do is John is going to click on or check the box next to 1, 2, 3, or 4 to say this is my citizenship status. So if he's a citizen, he checks box 1. In my example here, he's an alien authorized to work, so he's going to check box 4 and then put in his alien registration number. Okay, you want to always make sure that the employee signs and dates the form. This is a mistake we say all the time. You also need to understand that the employee is required to fill this form out no later than his hire date. Okay, so you can fill it out anytime after the offer is made, and up to and including the date of employment, but you cannot fill it out a couple days later. The employer section, you have up to 72 hours to complete it, and John has 72 hours to present his documents, but his signature needs to be on his date of hire or no later than that date. Okay, so that's something you just want to make sure that you pay close attention to, because we see that mistake made a lot. So the one change on this document, on this particular page, is where it's numbered now, that 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that's going to come in to play a role on the employer section number 2 in just a minute when I show you that. But that's the only really big change on page 1. Now, I mentioned a second ago that you might have an employee that speaks Spanish. Do not use the Spanish form unless they're in Puerto Rico, but what you would do is you would have someone help them prepare the form or translate the form for them. This section has been changed where I've highlighted it. It now does require an affirmative check. Either I did use a preparer translator or I didn't. Okay, so you want to make sure that one of those boxes are checked, and only if there has been someone to help prepare, translate the form, does this section at the bottom of page 1 get filled in. We see all the time in audits where either the employee has filled this in because they saw a place to sign, or the employer fills this in. You only complete this section if somebody has actually helped the employee complete this. Okay, so I just want to be really clear about that. Once the page 1 is done, again, it says at the bottom, employer completes next page, so hopefully the employee stops at the end of page 1. On the electronic version, there is a place to, again, check to make sure that it's complete. So know that you have that option. And then once you get that done, now you're going to ask the employee to please produce documents that are compliant with this. So as we know, there's going to be usually two different documents, could be one document, but 2 different things need to be satisfied with the documents. Something that verifies their identity and something that shows their eligibility to work in the United States. So that can be one document off of list A, and I'll show you those in a second, or it can be one document off of list B and one document off of list C. The couple changes on this section 2 form, section 2 of the form is this. One, at the top, we know from the current form you have to transfer the employee's name over to the top. Now they've broken down the boxes for last, first, and middle initial, but you notice there's a new box that's been added that says citizenship/immigration status. Now what you need to do is going back to page 1. Remember I said that now they're numbered. Those citizenship statuses are numbered. So now if the employee chooses, for example, I'm a citizen, you actually enter a number 1 in that box. You're not going to write in citizen. You're going to write in a number 1. So you're writing in the number that corresponds to that. If they say I'm an alien who's authorized to work, you're going to write in number 4. Okay? So that's one of the big changes there. The second change is this new additional information box in the middle bottom of the form. I actually sort of appreciate that they're doing this, and let me show you why, because these are the instructions for this box. So one of the big mistakes we see all the time is just people write all sorts of miscellaneous information on the form. They'll write dates that they processed the form, dates the form was filed. I've seen date stamps on it. I've seen people write in that they submitted it to E-Verify. I've seen people just write random stuff on the form, and as Monica is going to tell you later, all of that will get you fined. So you want to make sure that you're not writing just information in the margins, at the top, on the bottom, whatever. So they've provided us with this box. Now time will tell how they're going to interpret the word required in that first space where it says use the space containing additional information required for Form I-9. But one of the things I noticed here, and I highlighted it, which I think will be really helpful, is using that box when you have an employee who's left and you pull that I-9 form out of where you normally keep them. We'll talk about storage in a second, and writing in the termination date and a form retention date. And I think that will be really helpful, because right now you have to figure out how to do it with Post-its or put them in different folders or something like that. So I really like that, and there's some other things that they mention here about E-Verify and about all sorts of other stuff. So I think that that box is going to come in handy. Okay, so let's take a look at the list of acceptable documents. As far as I can tell, and I didn't go word for word, but I pretty much lined them up, I did not see any changes in the actual documents that are acceptable. So from that standpoint, I think that we're good to go, and you can just assume that everything's the same. A couple of things to note on here. One is that all documents must be unexpired. So someone cannot come in with a U.S. passport, even a driver's license, anything like that, and if it's expired, you are not allowed to accept it. So that's really important to know. One option, as I mentioned before, is for employees to provide something off of List A, so like a U.S. passport, for example. Again, cannot be an expired passport. Another option is to provide something from List B, which establishes identity, so a driver's license, a school ID card, something like that. But then they also have to still show that they're eligible to work in the United States. So there's a list of documents here, like Social Security card is one of the most common ones. Keep in mind, you are not allowed to tell the employee what they must present. I see all the time like offer letters that go out that say, on day one, please bring your driver's license and a Social Security card for your I-9 form. Okay, you cannot designate it. What we recommend is you actually take this page, which is, you know, I think page 3 on the new document, and actually copy this and send it to the employee and say, please bring something off of List A or something off of List B and List C, but do not specify which documents. Okay, make sure they're not expired. Your role is to make sure that you are visually inspecting the original documents and that they appear to be authentic on the surface. You don't have to be an investigator. You don't have to do any more due diligence, but make sure that you're not, taking a document and clearly the picture does not match this person, or it has a different name on it, or things like that. And I tell you that because I have seen that happen. Okay, one thing you can't see at the bottom, for some reason this is getting cut off on our slide here, but the other thing I highlighted at the bottom is it says examples of many of these documents appear in Part B of the Handbook for Employers, and then it says in parentheses M-274. We're going to have a picture of that later, but if you don't have that document stored somewhere, you should definitely download it. And you can just Google I-9 and Handbook for Employers or M-274 and you'll find it. It's a really helpful tool because it has a lot of FAQs, it gives examples, it tells you what to do if you get a certain document, things like that. It has not yet been updated with the new forms, but they're working on it and they hope to have that out shortly. One other thing to notice about this list is you'll see at the top of List C where it says a Social Security account number card, unless it includes one of the following restrictions. So this is how that card may look, is it may say without valid for work only with DHS or INS authorization. So you want to make sure that you are not accepting this unless it has that work authorization along with it. Okay, so I have done audits where I flip through and I see this, but there's no documentation with the work authorization. So you can take this for, the employee can use this, obviously have a Social Security number and put it on their W-4, for example, for payroll taxes, but you cannot accept this as proof of eligibility to work in the United States. Once you take whatever the documents are, my personal recommendation is that you make a photocopy of them and a photocopy of only the documents that you're taking. So a lot of times I suggest to employers you take copies of the documents, you staple it to the I-9 form, and then put it in your notebook. What will happen is I see where you take a Social Security card and you take a driver's license and a passport, and you copy all of them. Only copy the ones that are being used to complete this, okay? Don't copy extra documents. Now, I also tell you, like Monica has a different opinion on this. She does not believe you should copy it. I'm going to let her tell you why. But my pitch for why to copy the documents is because I know how busy it gets in an HR department, and it's so easy to forget to fill in a blank. Sometimes also it's a great way if you just want to have a quick look at somebody, you don't take photos for IDs or something, you go, oh, I have a picture on their passport or their driver's license. So it's a great reference, but it just helps you if, you know, a day goes by and you haven't finished the paperwork, you have a copy, you can fill in a blank, you don't have to go back to the employee, especially if they may not be in that building or something that you're working in. Once you have all the documents, you're going to go ahead and complete section 2. Now, in this one, what I'm doing is I'm showing you a copy of the electronic version because I think this is actually pretty nifty. The electronic version of the form actually provides you with drop-down choices and populates the not applicable automatically in certain instances. So in this example, that we're using here, we took John Doe, right? We transferred his information over, and then I'm going to say, okay, John Doe says that he's, in this example, an alien authorized to work in the U.S. Now if I go to list A, the top choice in the list, you see the drop-down box, the top choice is Employment Authorization Document Form I-766. It automatically knows that the issuing authority is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, so it populates that. You put in the document number, and then on the expiration date, when you click in that field, it actually pulls up a calendar. Okay, so it's easy. You flip through just like you do on a whole bunch of other platforms you use, I'm sure, and you go ahead and pick that. So it makes it pretty easy, especially if there's only one issuing authority, because that's a lot of times where we see problems. We also see problems where people write the document title under issuing authority and the issuing authority under document number and all sorts of stuff that goes on. This is going to sort of dummy-proof that and prevent people from writing the wrong thing in the wrong space, which can get you fined. So we want to make sure that everybody's filling out the right space with the right information. Now let's say we have that same document, but now the person says they're a citizen. So I changed up in the right-hand corner, I changed that citizenship to 1. Now if you looked at list A, I'll just tell you, it says at the top of the list, U.S. passport. Because if you're a U.S. citizen, you probably don't need an EAD. You probably would use a U.S. passport. You have all of the other options there, but it reorders them. So I think it's a pretty smart form. In this case, I said, okay, let's use a driver's license and social security card. Those are pretty commonly used. As soon as you put in the driver's license, it says issued by state or territory. Under issuing authority, it actually populates a list of states, and all you do is just choose off the list, type in the document number, and again, on the expiration date, it's a calendar. Under list C, if we use Social Security card unrestricted, it gives you 4 choices for issuing authority. Like, for example, my Social Security card came from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Some newer ones might have come from Social Security Administration. But it limits your choices to those 4 because it knows that you're using a Social Security card. You type in the document number, and in this case, it knows there's no expiration date, so it automatically just puts the NA in there. So I'm going to start highly recommending to my clients that you use the electronic version. Again, you cannot digitally sign it, but just using this portion of it is going to make it really easy to put the right information in the right spot and not make those mistakes that we commonly see that will get you fined. After you do this, you're going to sign the certification portion. The person who signs must inspect the documents. And I know this is really hard if you have an employee, for example, maybe you hired somebody in another state to be an outside sales rep or something like that. You cannot use Skype or FaceTime or any modern technology, unfortunately. Any other way to inspect it, it's not compliant. You need to send them to a notary or have their hiring manager at that location inspect the documents. And again, all of that has to be done in the first 3 days of employment. So that I'm waiting for the government to catch up with us on, but the requirement that the person sign this form, actually examine the documents, and then complete the rest of this form. So now, again, there's a little bit of a change because it's breaking out the fields for last name and first name instead of just having a place for the name. Do yourself a favor. You want to make yourself a template on this if you're going to use the paper version so you don't have to type all this information or fill it in all the time. Another common mistake we see is that the employee's first date of employment is not filled out, so you want to make sure you're writing that in. Another mistake we see is that that date is the wrong date. Someone puts in today's date, they signed it, but their start date was actually yesterday. You also want to make sure that where it says today's date is within 72 hours of their start time or you're out of compliance. Okay, so hopefully this all gets taken care of day one, but I know, again, maybe somebody showed up and they forgot their documents. Make sure they're bringing them in, because your requirement is to terminate their employment if they don't produce those documents within 72 hours. Then finally, Section 3 is for re-verification and rehires. Again, they split up the new name into 3 different sections. You only complete this if you need to recertify an expired work authorization. You do not have to recertify other unexpired documents. A driver's license that expires after they started work does not have to be recertified. A U.S. passport that expires after they started work does not have to be updated. This is really for work authorization documents. So you want to make sure that you complete this only if you need to re-verify or if you're rehiring somebody. And then also it happens if somebody gets married, for example, or has a name change for some reason. Okay? So U.S. citizens and non-citizen nationals never need re-verification. You do not need to re-verify, like I said, an expired U.S. passport or passport card, something like that. You just need to make sure that the work authorization documents would be updated if they expired at some point. All right. Finally, like I mentioned, the electronic form allows you to check to see if you're done. It says click to finish at the bottom of each page, which is great because it will highlight those other sections if you left something out. At the top of each form on the electronic version, it does have a link for instructions. You click on that, it'll pull up a new PDF that's got about 15 pages of instructions on it, so that could be helpful. It also, if you want to wipe out the form and start over again, click on Start Over, and then finally you have the option to print. Now let's talk about what to do if you make a mistake and what you need to do to make some corrections. So I told you when we do audits, we always find mistakes. I've pointed out some of them along the way. Some are easy to fix, like I said, forgetting to enter the person's hire date, you go look it up, you can put it in, right? Others are more challenging to fix, such as writing the expiration date on the issuing authority line or something like that. So let's go through some quick tips on what to do about making those corrections. First and foremost, you need to know that employers may not correct Section 1. That's the employee section to complete. So if you do notice a mistake, you need to have the employee fix that section. Okay? So what they would do is line through incorrect information, write in the correct information. So let's say, they put the last name where first name goes and vice versa. Have them line through the information, write in the correct information where it goes, and then sign and date those corrections. Same thing if you need to correct information in sections 2 or 3, which are the employer sections. You would go in, you would line through the incorrect information, write in the new information, and then sign and date it. If you have multiple corrections to make, if you have something that really can't be corrected in that manner, then what you can do is attach a new page, like fill out a new page 2, and attach it to the old one. And then you also want to include a memo and attach the top to indicate the date and sign it and then say why you're making those changes. So it could be, for example, we come in to do an audit, we say, hey, these forms have mistakes and we would suggest you just complete a new form for them. You would go ahead and complete page 2 because you messed up where you write in the information, and then you would do not throw out the old one, you would attach the new one on top of the old one, and then you would put a memo on top of that to say, this was audited on this date, we found mistakes, we made the corrections, and then date and sign it, okay? So do not do what a client did recently. She saw so many mistakes, she just decided, I'm going to just have all of my employees complete new I-9 forms and bring in documentation. Do not do that, okay? You're actually prohibited from doing that and having everybody recertify once they've been employed. You can obviously recertify documentation for authorization if it lapsed, like I just mentioned, but please don't go back to your employees and have them fill out all new I-9 forms. A couple other notes about making corrections. One is never use any sort of whiteout or other substance to cover it up. That will get you fined automatically. I've seen that happen. Again, you're going to line through it so they can see what was originally there. Always keep your original form and just attach the new form to it. And then again, I found a great link on the government website if you want to take a look. This gives you guidance on how to conduct an internal Form I-9 audit. So that's something that you can reference also to give you some tips. Now, every once in a while an employee comes in and confesses hey, I was illegal before and now I'm legal, or something. I used somebody else's identity, or and give you a wrong document. So if somebody does come in and do that, here are the steps for that. Complete a new Form I-9. Use the original hire date in that section 2 where you're going to do the certification. Attach the newly completed form to the old form, and again, attach a memo explaining the need for the new form. Just say, this is what happened, and you'll be good to go with that. Okay, let's talk about storage and retention of I-9 forms, and then I need to get this over to Monica so she has time to tell you all of her important stuff. We recommend storing the Form I-9 separate from the employee's file, right? You don't want to run the risk that other people that may access employee files have, access to confidential information, to citizenship status, to, race, age, all those different things. So just pull it out, keep it separate. You also don't want to have to turn over all of your employment folders if somebody's coming in just to look at the I-9s and vice versa. So when you have different regulatory bodies that may have an interest, let's not help them out by giving all the documents to everybody. Let's keep them separate. We recommend just taking a 3-ring binder. When someone fills out the I-9 form, you take that, and if you're going to make copies of the documents, you're going to attach them to them. And again, when you make copies of the documents, I should make this note. Do whatever your policy is going to be, whether you keep copies or don't keep copies of the documents. Do it for everybody across the board. Don't just say, oh, well, I only do that for people with Hispanic surnames or something like that. Or I only do it for men. I only do it for whatever, non-U.S. citizens. Okay, so you want to make sure that your policy is across the board. So we just recommend putting them alphabetically by last name in a notebook and keeping them like that. You do have the option of scanning the forms and retaining them electronically. Again, you have to print them out, wet signature them, but then you can scan them and retain them electronically. And once you've secured them online in whatever system you're going to use, you do have the option of just storing the paper copy. And Monica, I think, will reference why having them electronic like that is a good idea. Once somebody leaves the company, remove the form from that binder. You could have a terminated binder. You can set it up by month, depending on how long you have to keep the I-9 forms, but don't keep them in the same book, because again, if someone comes in to audit them, you don't want to give them additional opportunities to fine you, right? So just pull them out, and then you have to create a way for flagging the forms for destruction when you no longer need to keep them. Now, here's what the rule is for how long you have to keep them. You have to keep them for 1 year beyond employment or 3 years, whichever is longer. So, for example, if somebody worked for you for 6 months, right, you're going to have to keep the form for another 2.5 years. So going back to that new box that I talked about on page 2, that would be where you could write in the termination date and go, okay, well, December 8th, 2016 was the term date. I'm going to have to keep it then until whatever that would be, like June 8th of 2019 or whatever that is, right? 2.5 years later. But then you would be able to destroy it on that date. So you probably don't want to look every single day to see what documents are destroyed, but you might want to make folders by quarter, for example, or just an annual folder where I'm destroying this at the end of 2019 and throw it in there. Okay. Let's see. If someone works for 5 years, then you just have to keep the form for 1 additional year. Okay. So it's the longer of those 2 rules: 1 year beyond the end of employment or 3 years. So just come up with a system for holding on to that. And now I'm going to turn it over actually to Marla real quick, who's going to tell you a quick story about a client situation she had, and then also say a few words about how she works with Monica. Marla?
Thanks, Linda. That was a fantastic step-by-step presentation. I think everybody will agree also that the slides will be a nice little handbook reference that they can go back to, because it's so much information, but that was fantastic. So I just wanted to touch on why this is important beyond the obvious, that that the government might come in and ask to see the I-9s. And please recall that there are 2 ways that you can get in trouble as an employer under the Act. And the first is that you don't have the documents, the I-9s, prepared correctly. I had the unfortunate circumstance with a family company. Somebody doesn't have their mute on, by the way. With a family company where the government came in, audited the I-9s, and although we did not have anyone who wasn't authorized to work in the United States, we did have errors, as Linda just pointed out, all the different types of errors with our I-9s, and it resulted in a $45,000 penalty or fine. We were able to negotiate that, but nonetheless, that's a significant amount of money, obviously goes to the bottom line. The second potential violation, obviously, is having workers who are not authorized, and that creates fines and penalties as well. But why else is this important beyond that obvious? And I'm going to give you a little story of a client of mine who was preparing to sell the company in excess of $40 million. And during that process, engaged in dialogue with a buyer who asked to start the due diligence process of reviewing company contracts, company policies, and of course, company I-9s. Instead of having counsel or outside consultants review the I-9s prior to sending them to the buyer, the seller sent them on to the buyer's counsel, who engaged an attorney to do an I-9 audit and found an extraordinary number of errors in the I-9s, many of which could have been and later were corrected, but because of the extraordinary amount of errors, it caused the buyer to be afraid that there was a very large portion of the workforce that might walk out the door after they purchased the company, so the buyer canceled the in excess of $40 million sale. That's a significant business point that has nothing to do with whether or not the government would come in and audit your I-9s. That needs to be considered, and hopefully it sends home the message about how important this is. In conducting an I-9 audit, also, I'd like everybody to consider whether or not you use an outside consultant, such as Linda's firm, or whether or not you use an attorney. There are times when you need that attorney-client privilege to be in place. And if you do need that, for example, when in connection with a sale, maybe in connection with a merger, maybe in connection with litigation, you might need to keep that attorney-client privilege, and if you do, then your audit should be done by an attorney and not an outside consultant. If those aren't issues, then outside consultants such as Linda's firm, I know they've done many of these audits and done them very well for clients of ours as well. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Monica and let you know we've referred quite a bit of business to Monica in connection with immigration issues, primarily for our employers who are wanting to hire in employees from outside and do it legally, or have employees here that want to go overseas, and she is fantastic. So I know we're pressed for time, so Monica, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much, Marla and Linda. Both of you set this up really, really well. So document abuse, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. I know that Linda went over, requesting documents more than are required, or requesting a particular document. I just want to make sure that you're not held as an employer to know which documents are, lawful or not, or what documents are genuine. But, there are some obvious red flags that we've seen in some of the audits where people were requesting, showing documents that said that the person was one gender and, the person standing in front of them was another one, names all wrong, wrong on different documents. And the reason I suggest that my clients don't retain copies of the underlying documents, I think it just gives them, if you're audited by the government, by ICE or by the Homeland Security investigations, that just gives them one more piece of evidence to show that you should have known that this document was fraudulent, or that this document was not, a genuine document. So again, to reiterate what Linda said, just have a policy. We don't keep copies of any documents, or yes, we're going to copy for all I-9s, we're going to copy the underlying documents. It's certainly up to you, but my recommendation is usually, why give them one more thing to look at and compare? And it also gives them, oh, you transposed a number, well, there's another paperwork violation. You never know the type of officer that you're going to have inspecting your I-9s, and they could really be looking and digging in for more than what you want them to start pulling. They start pulling a little thread, and you don't want that to happen. They're only supposed to look at the I-9s. And so that's why one important thing about all of this, and I know it sounds kind of scary once I start talking about, fines or the fact that a deal fell through, I think that good faith goes a long way. And so if they see that the majority of your I-9s are correctly completed, that you do have an I-9 for each person, I wanted to just touch real quickly on what do you do if an inspector shows up with a notice of inspection. I would say that you should notify your receptionist or whoever's at the front in charge of any visitors that that they contact the appropriate person, HR director, manager, employer, directly, and not let the inspector walk through the facility, not walk through the offices, but they should just sit there and wait until somebody can come out and greet them, the person who's in charge. This is really important because we don't want them to get more information than they have to, or to color their view of how the company runs. You have 3 business days to provide the I-9s, payroll records, articles of incorporation, current number of employees. This is why if you have it on an electronic folder, it's a lot easier to just say, okay, here's the folder for my I-9s. We're going to print these out and give them to you. It's much easier than starting to go through all these folders and they're standing in your office or, you know, looking at other things. Again, we want to keep them isolated from how you run the business. That's not what they're there to look at. And can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so part of the civil penalties, there are civil penalties as well as criminal penalties for I-9 violations. And they do add up. Even though the penalties are $110, start at $110, go up to $1,100 for each violation. These can add up. One form can have several different technical violations on them. And these are just 2 examples. And again, these are really old cases. But remember, when the government's looking for money to, because they don't have enough in taxes, this is what they're going to do. They're going to go after employers and try to get them to find them. Look at the Abercrombie and Fitch. More than $1 million in fines in the technical violations. Nothing had to do with hiring unlawful workers. So just keep that in mind when you're filling out the forms. And I do think the new form, the new electronic form that's available, is going to help prevent some of those. You can look at this later. It's just an overview. The fines are increased based on whether it's a first offense, second offense. You know, they want to see a pattern and practice of non-compliance. So this is the next couple of slides will just show you these. I just wanted to show you that these are very serious. If you knowingly hire or continue to hire unauthorized workers, the fines are pretty significant as well. They can go up as much as $21,000 depending for each unauthorized worker. So if you've got 5 unauthorized workers and you know that they're not working with authorization, you could be fined, you know, over $100,000. Again, these are things that you want to first avoid when you hire people, but and as soon as you know that someone's not authorized for employment, legally, technically, you need to terminate them. You should speak to an employment attorney, Marla, regarding that termination process, but these are things that you need to be looking out for and that the inspectors will be looking for. Okay, here's a couple of situations where there were some criminal penalties imposed. On the Michael Bianco, the company, and 3 managers were all arrested. They now have federal criminal charges against them because they knowingly hired illegal workers. Some companies we've heard of even assist employees on obtaining fraudulent documents. So these are really serious penalties. I think under the new administration, this is going to be really looked at a lot more carefully, and really they're really going to pin employers to the wall on these issues. So we need to be very careful about that. Okay, I'm just very quickly going to speak about E-Verify. There are only certain states that have to, by law, have to E-Verify every single employee. California is not one of them unless you're a federal contractor, in which case you do have to use E-Verify. Remember that E-Verify is not to be used in place of I-9, okay? But E-Verify sometimes does help. Again, it shows good faith, trying to make sure that you're complying with the law. And there's pros and cons for this. We can talk about, you know, there's some of the different options about some of the different issues that are cons. I think personally, I think that it's not a good idea to again, it's giving the government more access, more information, and you open yourself up to unsupervised visits with employees. The government can come in and talk to employees, maybe ask them questions about other employees. I have to mention, I should have mentioned this initially, but almost all the I-9 inspections that we've worked with have been the result of a disgruntled employee. So these are people who have been terminated and then call immigration and say, by the way, this is happening at this company. So just as a point of, information. That's why compliance is so important. Okay. Next. Okay. These are the states that require I-9, E-Verify. See, California's not on it. But if any of your branch offices are in those states, you would have to do E-Verify for those employees working in that state. So most importantly of all the recommendations, download the new form, train your HR managers, your hiring managers how to complete this new form. I would also suggest that you have a policy that can give the historical reference, so people can look at it and say, okay, we have a new receptionist. Somebody's got to go out there and tell a receptionist. If we ever get a visit from anyone from ICE or HSI or DHS, this is who you have to call. So make sure that your policies are in place. Train people, train them over and over again, because sometimes things get late. Oh yeah, well we can fill the I-9 later, and then it's past 3 days and they haven't completed the section 2 of the form. So policies are very important, and also create a document retention policy and system. You don't want to keep any forms that you don't need to. Again, Linda mentioned the handbook for employers, the M274. I keep it on a desktop version so I can refer to it all the time. It's very detailed. It tells you how to complete I-9s for different types of employees, including what I mostly work with are non-immigrant employees who are foreign workers who are authorized to work in the United States. And this really helps on those technical issues on how to complete I-9s. It also shows pictures of what an I-9, different documents should look like, documents that are no longer being used, fraudulent documents. It's a very, very helpful tool. And also I-9 Central with the USCIS.gov website is a great reference tool. Okay.
Thanks so much, Monica.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Monica, Linda, Marla. That was a very informative webinar. That was packed with information. I hope all of you enjoyed that too. We are sure to have some questions on this. I'm looking right now, and there are a load coming up, but that does conclude the presentation portion of our webinar. And now I'd like to spend a little time, just allowing you guys to send in your questions. So right now, some of you have found this already, but you can go ahead and submit your question over on the dashboard. There's a little area that just says questions. Just type it in, hit send, and I will read it aloud for our panelists to answer today. And, while we're waiting for those questions to come in, Monica, can you tell me what this is, this piece of artwork that
yes,
we're looking at right now?
This is something I found. I did not create this flowchart, but it seems like it would take like a rocket scientist to figure this out. This is basically, the green card. As I said, I work with a lot of foreign nationals, a lot of foreign workers. I work with the employers that hire them, and everybody wants to know, well, what do I need to do to get a green card? And I just have to fill out some forms. Nothing could be further from the truth. This just gives you a very visual example of some of the things that could happen based on your person's background, education, qualifications, what type of employment they do, what the employer is willing to, what kind of job the employer is willing to offer them. And you can see there's quite a few little red spots that say sorry, and that basically means you can go through this entire process, but you're not going to get a green card at the end of the day. And it's very complex, and you have to look at so many different issues. Our firm partners with HR managers to help them manage their entire immigration program. A lot of technology companies have a lot of foreign national workers, and so compliance is key, ensuring that everyone is complying with the immigration laws, but also at the end of the day, most of these workers are looking for a way to stay in the United States for longer terms, and they do want their green cards or lawful permanent residence. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting example. You can have your kids follow along. And
yeah, I don't know. My kids can probably explain it to me better than I can understand it myself.
That's so crazy. Hey, Monica, Julie, let me ask you a question. So, Monica, give everybody just 1 minute. I know we've referenced, you're here today to talk about I-9 forms, but how do you work with most of your employers? Like, why do they come to you?
primarily they come to me when they find a great candidate that they want to hire, and the person either is in another non-immigrant category, such as an H-1B, and now the employer wants to hire this new employee and transfer their H-1B status over to the new company. So primarily it starts with that. I get an employer that calls me and says, well, I've got somebody from Canada and they're going to perform these jobs. How do I hire them? A lot of times employees, there's a lot of information on the internet. So a lot of it is false. A lot of it is not complete. So people will say, oh, they told me all I need is a letter. And so, well, no, let's go through this entire process. Let's see what's really required and whether the person even qualifies for one of those non-immigrant categories. So what I do is help the employer be able to hire and retain that talent.
Great.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so for the sake of time and the fact that we have a number of questions, I'm going to kind of combine some of them and hopefully we get more people's questions answered that way. The first, Monica, is specifically, I think, to you. You talked a little bit about the government coming and, asking to inspect the I-9 forms. Can you elaborate a little bit more on maybe how we, make sure we have everything locked and loaded before they knock on the door? I know you talked about, keeping them in the lobby and things like that, but what documentation and what other things should people be wary of and have ready in case they do come knocking on the door?
Right. So part of the audits that Linda conducts, that we conduct before immigration shows up is key. You want to make sure that things are being completed correctly, that policies are being implemented and followed, because when it comes down to, if you get a notice of inspection from immigration, you have 3 days to come to provide the documents that they're requesting. They're always going to request the I-9s in their entirety. Again, if you've got document copies stapled to some and not all, that's a violation. They want to see payroll records. They want to see a list of your current employees so they can compare the current employees with the employees that are no longer there. Why do you still have their I-9s in there, or you don't have I-9s for current employees? Those are things they'll look at. They'll want to see your articles of incorporation or membership and your business licenses. Once they inspect those documents, they'll come back to you and say, okay, these are the things to change. You would have to fix them in the manner that Linda outlined above. But you only have 10 days to make those corrections. If you've got over 1,000 employees and you've got, let's say, 10% of your I-9s are not in compliance, that's a lot of work to get done in 10 days. So having an audit done ahead of time before you're ever even audited by the government, or inspected, I should say is the right word, is a really a very good business practice. And then we've had clients where we said, okay, these are the items that you need to correct. They're under an inspection requirement, and they say, no, we're not going to change. Fine. We've had clients where 2/3 of their employee workforce were unauthorized, and they were fined over $50,000, and they only had 50 employees, and so 2/3 of their employees had to leave, were terminated, and that really that affects a company. So you have to make sure that you're following all the rules so that at the end of the day, you are employing the authorized workers and you're following the rules.
Okay, great. Ladies, did you want to add anything?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. Great.
Me too.
All right. We have quite a few questions about, like the resident alien card and some of the documentation that they would bring in and share with you. But, at the time, the card may have had a valid date, but then after, words, it's expired. So can you guys address what happens when that, proof, the documentation information that they provide is expired, either before or after they submit for the I-9 verification?
I can speak to that if you like. Linda went over it.
Okay.
All the documents must be valid at the time they're shown to you, but some documents, such as a passport, the green card or lawful permanent residence card, those things, if they expire afterwards, that doesn't change the person's status. They still have a green card. They still have, they're still a U.S. citizen just because their passport expires. but they need to be valid at the time you hire them. Now, there are other things for non-immigrant workers, as I mentioned, who are on visas or who have work authorizations through school. Those are known as OPT. Those things do expire, and you should also have a system for catching those expiration dates. Now, at our firm, we feed those into our database, and we remind our clients your client's H-1B status is going to expire in 6 months. We should start working on an extension if that's possible. Or a student status is going to expire. What are we going to do to have them continue working for you? So that's a very important part of the process as well.
Okay. Marla, Linda, did you have anything?
Monica is awesome.
Yes, I agree.
Good. Linda, I think you mentioned that in some cases, like regarding the Social Security number, under Section 1, that it's optional for the employee to fill it out. But in the case when the employee does not fill it out, how do you indicate that not available when it's received? So how do you do that if they're not going to provide that document?
Yeah, so first of all, the employer doesn't fill out anything on page 1. It's the employee that does it. So you should ask the employee to write in NA, but there's no space for it. So I'm not exactly sure. And Monica and I looked at this the other night because if you notice, if you go back to a few slides to where there was, the pinkish red highlighted, fields that showed missing information, that field wasn't highlighted. So I don't know if it's okay just to leave that blank and not write an A. I would probably suggest writing it like over the format there, where to put in the Social Security card until we get instructions. Otherwise, I don't know, unless Monica, you know something I don't know.
Well, basically everybody needs a Social Security number to work in the United States. Now, whether that has to be in conjunction with work authorization, such as the Social Security card that you showed us that says only valid with DHS verification, that's why I think that form won't highlight, because if you put NA, that means you don't have a Social Security number. That's going to bring up payroll issues. So the real question is that something that they're going to then use as part of their document C list as part of their work authorization? So it's okay if they don't want to write that in. I don't think there's an issue there at all. They don't have to. But to say it's not applicable is also not right, because they do have a Social Security number. They must to work. So I think that's why it doesn't highlight on that smart form.
Okay. I hate to say it, but we have run out of time. I know we have quite a few questions left. Again, I'll encourage you to refer to your handout section where everyone's information is included. Right now, you've got Marla's up there. But you can go ahead and access that. And then what we'll do right now, I think, Linda, is it all right if you just kind of tell us about the next, I'm trying to get us back to the right page.
Yeah.
Linda, go ahead and tell us about the next, there we go. Tell us about the next webinar. This was the last one for 2016. So what do we got on tap for 2017?
Yeah, 2017, we're going to start off by talking about new laws for the new years. We always do. So what you need to know in 2017. So January 26th will be at the end of the month. We're doing a lot of handbook updates right now with some of the changes that have gone into effect this year. We're also waiting anxiously to see if the legislature, state or federal, drops anything in the middle of December like they did last year, but we'll know by then for sure, and we'll give everybody a heads up on what they need to know. So there's the registration link right there. Just wanted to make sure that you can register ahead of time, because we are going to limit it to the first 100 attendees. Couple things to remember real quickly, though, is minimum wage is going up. If you have 26 or more employees, minimum wage is going to go up January 1st, which also means for those employers it's increasing the minimum exempt salary, which is twice minimum wage. So you want to make sure you do that calculation and adjust salaries accordingly if you have exempt employees. Hopefully I'll say qualified exempt employees. So take a look at that. If you need any help with that, or with auditing your workforce for anything, please reach out to one of us. And I just also want to say thanks again, Monica. It was so great to have a true expert on board with us, and we really appreciate your time.
Great. Well, thank you all. Have a great holiday season, and we look forward to talking and helping you manage your HR and legal compliance in the year of 2017. Take care and have a great day.